Hello everybody, welcome to another video. People have been asking where he is, so here he is. Here's Bram, he's fine, don't worry. I wanted to start this one with a quick announcement. Me and a couple of the guys from the Deployment Zone community are making a 13-mile trek in the Brecon Beacons for Alzheimer's. We have to raise a bit of money, so I put the link to the Just Giving page in the description below if you fancy giving to a very worthwhile charity. Thank you so much, and with that aside, let's get straight into the video. So Christmas is fast approaching and I have to make a present for my stepdad. Now my stepdad is a massive Fallout fan, specifically his favourite game being Fallout New Vegas. Obviously he is a man of great taste. He's the reason that I ever got into video games at all, and he introduced me to the world of Warhammer way back when in 2005. So whilst he's not a hobbyist these days, he is the reason that I'm aware of this hobby and as a result in it at all. So I thought, what better to give him than a miniature for Christmas that I'm going to paint up and put on a nice display stand. The Fallout miniatures are absolutely lovely. They're really easy to build, being, as you saw there in this case, 3 parts. The models are always lovely, but the only issue they have is that they're resin, so sometimes the primer doesn't like to stick and sometimes parts come a little bit warped. I tried to counteract the primer problem by adding some matte varnish prior to adding the black primer, but it didn't seem to help too much. In any case, most of the primer covered off the model, so I could start adding my base coats. In this case, I went straight in with Rhinox hide for the leather duster. Then for some smooth layering and blends, I went in with a mix of Rhinox hide and Mournfang brown and added it to the highest parts and areas that aren't naturally in shadow. From there I went directly to pure Mournfang brown. Now for those who don't know, this is a New California Republic Ranger. These guys patrol the Mojave Wasteland in the game of Fallout New Vegas, and they are some of the most recognisable Fallout figures outside of the Brotherhood of Steel power armoured guys. I think everything about them is badass. They've got glowing red eye lenses, they've got duster coats, they're wearing Levi's. Well, the Fallout universe equivalent of Levi's, but yes, they're wearing jeans. It's cool. Now these awesome dusters that they wear are to keep the heat and the dust of the Mojave off of them, so naturally this is a key feature of the model I wanted to get right. So I continued mixing and blending my paints until I had a really nice layered highlight. After a mix of Mournfang brown and Baylor brown, I went in with pure Baylor brown to add some nice texture and jagged edges. Leather tears, so it's only natural that in an unforgiving environment like the Mojave Wasteland, there's going to be a lot of fabric tearing. To add tears, it's really simple. Just thin your paints, and when you're going to do something along the lines of an edge highlight, dab your brush rather than drag it. Moving on to the denim, I'm using Field Blue this time as my base colour. This is going to be my mid-tone, so I'm going to add a bit of shade with a darker colour, in this case the fang on the underside of the legs and in any of the deepest folds, and then I'm going to highlight up with Rust Grey and then Fenrisian Grey, doing exactly what I did on the duster coat with Fenrisian Grey as my final highlight, being a nice jagged highlight. Denim is a very heavy cloth, so naturally it has a lot of texture, so this will add a lot of life to it. Also, again, unforgiving environment, rip your jeans. I rip my jeans just wander around the house sometimes, so these are going to be beaten up. I'm actually just incredibly clumsy, but we'll ignore that for now. Now that I was happy with the jeans, I moved on to the body armour. In this case, it's Police Riot armour, so it's black. The primer I'd used, whilst being black, had a slightly glossy finish, despite being advertised as matte, so I went in with some Abaddon black to make sure it stayed a nice satin/matte finish. In this way, the tones wouldn't be too different to the rest of the stuff I've already painted. At this stage, I just added a simple highlight to both the respirator and the flak armour with Dawnstone. Now the rifles in the game are matte black, so I started with Panzer Grey as a highlight on top of the black base coat, and then went in with Mechanica Standard Grey and Dawnstone as a final edge highlight. I also added some brown to the wooden buttstock and all the belts, as I'd missed it earlier. Now something that's often overlooked when we're in this hobby is just how much skill we build up in painting these little figures, and they're often for ourselves or in some cases commissions, and we forget that they have a lot of value attached to them. I'm not talking strictly about monetary value, even though a lot of models are very expensive. I'm talking about the skill that's been put into it, the time that it's taken you to not only paint it, but to hone those skills in order to paint something. So I think using those hard-earned hobby skills to create a gift for someone who either understands the subject matter, like in this case being Fallout, or understands the miniature hobby and likes miniatures in general, is a really great idea. Not only is it a really cool gift to give to somebody who is into the subject matter, but you're spending a lot of time on them, and that adds a real personal touch that ordering something off Amazon doesn't necessarily do. Now, I'm not saying this is for everybody. Clearly not everybody's going to be too thrilled to have a miniature, and also you're probably not going to have the time to give everybody a miniature that you've painted. But for those few people who are into the hobby or do like the subject matter of what you're painting, it's going to be something they'll cherish forever. That's my 2 pence on it anyway. Anyway, while we've been chatting, I've been adding wood grain to the rifle's buttstock. If you'd like to know a little bit more about how to paint wood, I painted some crates in an Imperial Guard video recently. You can see that in the top right corner. It's simple, yet a satisfying process. Now, this Ranger has a standard issue army helmet and a Pip-Boy, which is the Fallout universe's in-game inventory system, or wrist computer. As he's wearing a standard issue army helmet, I went with Castellan Green, which is the closest we have to standard issue army green. I highlighted this up with Death Guard green and then Nurgling green. I used the exact same colours on the Pip-Boy to highlight that up, and then went in with some white to make it look like the menu that you'd see in-game. I'm not going wild with the detail here because it will just obscure the highlighting I've already done, but I'm just giving the impression of there being words on the screen. I also added some tally marks to his helmet because I thought that would be a cool addition. I really wanted to write Born to Kill, but this guy is just so tiny it would look like a mess. The Marine with Born to Kill on his helmet, name the movie in the comments. After that detail work, I added the belt buckles in a metallic colour. When I looked at the in-game models of the NCR Rangers, a couple of them had numbers up on their gorgets, so I added 08 like the first one I came across on Google Images. It wasn't perfect the first time round, so I came back in with my base colour and tidied it up. Now that we've completed a bunch of the main details, our Ranger is really starting to come along. Next up is the eye lenses. I ran some Mephiston red in, quite thin, so it would flow into the naturally occurring recesses. Basically, this meant I didn't have to jab the brush around in there too long and accidentally ruin the respirator. After that, I went in with some Wild Rider red and some Troll Slayer orange. This will add a really cool spot colour to the model. I also added it to the scope of the sniper rifle, so it looks like everything's linked up to one system. With the lenses and the sniper scope now complete, I went back to the helmet. It was looking a little bit clean compared to everything else that's been fairly heavily weathered and has texture attached to it, so I added a few scratches and dents. With the helmet complete, that's the main model done and we can move on to the basing. This was something I was really looking forward to. Originally, I wasn't going to stick him to this pre-molded base because I was going to put him directly on a plinth and make the base on top of the plinth. But the base was just too good to pass up. It has the cool New Vegas sign half written on the floor and I couldn't leave it. It had to be part of the diorama. I kept the painting on the base very simple and generally my paints were wet blending with one another, which is quite a natural effect. I didn't go extreme with any highlighting because I want the attention to still be on the model. As I was painting this base, I was trying to figure out how I was going to incorporate it into a plinth without it looking like it was just stuck on top. There were a few solutions that I came up with, adding modelling putty around the rim of the base and then adding some foliage or rocks to blend it in, or just skipping that stage and going straight to large rocks into small rocks, which is eventually what I chose to do. Now we come on to the problem of the plinth. I ordered some online, but it turns out they were far too small because I didn't read the fine print. As you can see, this was never going to work, so I'm going to have to leave our fortified painting station and go out into the world. Okay, once again safe from the elements, we can continue with the hobby. I picked up a cloche from Hobbycraft, which is meant to display things like flowers or ornaments. The base is larger than I'd originally planned, but we can make it work. It's also the wrong colour, so I took some very cheap black paint and covered it off entirely and glued our guy to the centre. Now on to what we were talking about earlier and blending the bases together. I started off by adding some large rocks and Mod Podge. I strategically placed the large rocks where the sign was on the base, because otherwise it would look like there was supposed to be a sign continuing out of either side. This way it looks like it's crumbled and large rocks have fallen on top of it, as opposed to it just stopping in thin air. Then as a middle step, I added some ballast over some more Mod Podge. These will be my medium-sized rocks. The final stage was to add some sand and blend it all together. I added some isopropyl alcohol and some super glue, which was a slight mistake because the super glue changed into a weird colour, but it worked. The weird colour is also by no means a big problem because we're going to cover it all off with some very thin Mournfang brown once everything is completely dry. If you're going to stick rocks like this to a base, just use isopropyl alcohol and thin down PVA glue. Once I'd painted all the rocks and brushed off any stragglers, I cleaned up the areas on the base where some paint had spilled over. When painting any textured surface that isn't completely smooth, like wood, I recommend going with the grain. This means that you won't destroy your brush, which in this case is fairly unlikely, but it also means the paint flows better. I then added some gamer grass tufts that are in a desert theme to make sure the base had a bit of variety, otherwise it just looks like a brown lump. Now for my favourite part, I added my favourite pigment from Abteilung 502, Vietnam Earth, all over the rocks, tufts, our little guy's shoes, the inside and outside of his jeans, anywhere he's been sat, and also on his body armour where he's been lying down, probably sniping some fools. Pigments are such an easy way to add really cool effects to your models. They do need some setting afterwards, and I just sprayed varnish on. It does dull them down a tad, but ultimately the effect is still there. Another way to add really cool effects is object source lighting, basically adding a glow. I decided against that in this case because it would take away too much from the key areas of the model. I also wanted to keep the model looking fairly desaturated because he is in a desert environment. Anyway, with one last round of cleanup, that's the model complete. I really enjoyed painting this and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. Here's how it looks with the little glass lid on. I really hope he likes it and I hope you enjoyed this video. Merry Christmas, I've been Sam, see you next time.